The theme of House of Ashes is the enemy of my enemy is my friend. And in 2 out of the 3 sections of the story, the archaeologists don't have a thematically important scene. We see sworn enemies able to team up and get a better result for having done so. Whether it's Karum fighting alongside the man who just minutes earlier was prepared to behead him, or Jason, an ignorant racist, becoming best friends with Salim, one of the Iraqis he'd done his best to dehumanize. This is a story about how crisis can bring people together. I believe that there's another story of this kind of against all odds team-up hidden in the game, and now I'm going to tell you about it. First, we have to establish a couple of assumptions about the alien city ship that I'm basing this theory on. A, and this one is basically inarguable, the parasites attacking the ship's crew happened while the ship was in transit. We can assume this based on the presence of these skeletons who killed one another in the fight. Their bodies rotted away in whatever type of air was filling the ship at the time. There are likely skeletons all over the ship that we never got a chance to see. B, the second assumption is that the hives of stacked bat creatures are uninfected passengers, and it's only the huge ship crew of aliens that were converted into vampires. The basis for this is that the bats in the hives are stacked in an orderly fashion, organized in a way that makes sense to take up the least amount of space and pile in the largest number of creatures. We never see one of the bats in a hive wake up. Although we see some vampire bats crawling down the hives, it's likely that they flew there from the roof or a higher point, and are simply climbing down it to get to Nick, who's at the bottom of the hive. By comparison, all of the statues that turn out to have vampires in them are kind of just placed wherever. In the middle of hallways, perched on top of machines, you get the sense that the vampires, at some point when they run out of food, just plop down where they are, activate a bat's natural ability to hibernate, and then wait around until they detect more food, probably using their spore trails. Then we have assumption C. The ship isn't capable of warping, folding space, or some other method of traveling faster than light. We know they come from Cetus, probably Ceti Alpha 5, because it would be cute if they did. And that's over 10 light years away from Earth. So let's say they could go most of the speed of light in their city-sized ship. That's still a 15-year journey or so. This means that the ship is mostly made up of sleeping passengers. There's also a huge crew to keep it running, likely with reserve crew members that would take over at some point during the trip when it was time for the normal crew to hibernate. And finally, we have assumption D, that these bat creatures in the chairs died during the crash, not in the battle while the parasites were taking over the ship, turning everyone into vampires. The basis for this assumption is that while the fighting bat creatures had their bodies rot away to nothing but skeletons, these guys were oddly preserved and wound up fossilized instead. I suggest that this is because the composition of Earth's atmosphere was different enough from what was in the ship that the sudden rush of air in killed the alien bacteria that normally would have caused the bodies to decompose. So like a dead body lying inside a nuclear reactor, they just looked completely normal right up until they fossilized. Okay, now that we've got all of my assumptions set in, I'll reveal the clue that sent me down this insane theorizing path. The chairs have consoles on them that can be operated by the bat monster's giant hands, which suggests that they're integral to the operation of the ship. Piloting, energy management, life support, we can't tell what the chairs do specifically, but they're likely how it's piloted and run. Here's what the bodies in the chairs look like. They're all uninfected bat creatures, suggesting that this was the ship's crew, and they died at the controls, most likely when the ship crashed, because if they'd been killed by vampires, they likely wouldn't have died perched at a control console. They'd have been running, fighting, or hiding. Now, check out this guy. He's also in a chair. It's fossilized, so seems to have died in the crash as well. But notably, you can see the parasite fangs poking out of his mouth. This is a vampire, but it's helping operate the ship? It's doubtful that this could have been a crew member who was just infected while operating the controls. We've seen what it's like when parasites take over people. There's pain and writhing and a rapid decrease in ability to function. It's doubtful that a bat creature could have gone through all of that while staying perched in its chair, and then remained still in the chairs as the parasite took over, then coincidentally died moments after the transformation was complete, before it had a chance to go looking for food. So, if that's not what happened, what's the story here? Here's my aforementioned crazy theory. The The bat creatures leave Ceti Alpha 5 for Earth, probably because the parasite was wrecking their planet. Given how extremely unlikely it is for a colony ship to have stopped somewhere along the way to their destination, because then they would risk being infected by an alien life form. You'd have to be unbelievably stupid to do something like that. And yes, that was a dig at the plot of Alien Covenant. The parasites were on the ship, though, and they start infecting the crew, which leads to a battle. Many are killed, and in the end, the vampires convert the remainder of the crew and go to sleep, waiting for the chance to eat and reproduce at some point in the future. Then, years later, the ship closes in on Earth, but no one starts the proper landing procedures. This causes an alarm to go off, waking the reserve crew, and some of the vampires. There's conflict between them, of course, but seeing as the ship is about to crash into Earth, killing everyone, the bat creatures somehow manage to communicate with the vampires. It's possible that, given their advanced civilization, they know way more about the parasites, including how to talk to them on some level, and convince them to agree to a truce, at least until they've kept their ship from exploding. As a result, we see evidence of the vampires working alongside the bat creatures to try and operate the ship. Perhaps they even saved it by slowing it down enough or activating shields, so that it merely crashed into the Zagros Mountains relatively intact, rather than exploding when it hit the Earth, as one would assume it should have. Unfortunately, the entire reserve crew and their temporary vampire helpers were all killed in the crash, so no one was left to remember that the two groups were able to put their differences aside temporarily to work towards a common goal. At least not until the ship was recovered by humans millions of years later, when those humans had to learn a similar lesson to save themselves. The only question remains, will other humans learn the lesson that this ship's journey has to teach them? I've been the Hidden Object Guru, thanks for watching. If you haven't already, please like and subscribe. If you'd like to see more from me, drop by the stream we do every night on YouTube and Twitch, weekdays at 9 p.m. Eastern, weekends at noon Eastern. Special thanks to my patrons Marissa, Desire, Eduardo, Brian, and Joanne. If there's any topics you'd like to see covered in future videos, please mention them in the comments section. I'll see you back here for more dark pictures, but until then, au revoir.